Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I've got a great guest on today, someone I've known quite a while, at least over 15 years, and that's Ed Moore. Ed is coming to us from Tallahassee, Florida today. Ed, welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Great to meet you. I look forward to the conversation.
Well, Ed has been an agent of innovation in and out of the public policy process, mostly in Florida. And we're going to get to his story in just a minute. But if you're new to the Agents of Innovation podcast, or maybe you've been listening to 150 plus episodes now, I want to ask you to please subscribe to the podcast. That's how you'll be first alerted to the upcoming episodes of other guests as well. And also, if you haven't done so yet, please like us, throw us a comment wherever you're listening to it. Maybe it's on Spotify or Apple. Rate us 5 stars. Give us a review. That helps more people learn about the podcast. And if you'd like to watch us, you can come on over to YouTube. Just go to the YouTube search bar, type in Agents of Innovation Podcast. If you want to search for this particular episode, you could add Ed Moore's name to that search bar, and he should come right up. But you can actually watch us have this conversation as well. And many of the previous guests on this podcast are now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community. So we give you an opportunity not just to listen on a podcast, but to directly connect with them. Maybe it's on a live stream where we do these live coaching calls. Maybe it's in person. You know, we've done it recently. We did a Miami dinner experience with 5 featured innovators. We did one in Denver over the summer as well with a few featured innovators. And but we also do all these great group trips everywhere. We're about to go, we're beginning 2025 with trips to Guatemala and Dominican Republic. We've gone to Colombia, Argentina, Uruguay, Nashville. And what we do is we connect with a lot of local entrepreneurs on those trips and sometimes even bring some featured innovators with us. So it's a really great opportunity to connect and learn with others. And we got some great trips being planned on the other side of the Atlantic for later this year, looking at Norway and Morocco. So stay tuned. You can find all of this at fearlessjourneys.org. And if you want to subscribe to the free newsletter, fearlessjourneys.org/subscribe. And I know Ed subscribes because I get a lot of feedback from him over my emails. And that's what led us to saying, hey, let's have this conversation here on the podcast. So Ed, welcome again to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Thank you. And I'm going to pre-scout Norway for you because we're going to Norway in February. So a little colder than when you're going, but
yeah. And what parts of Norway do you plan to be in?
Way north. We're flying into Bergen and then going up to Tromsø and way up into the Arctic Circle and looking for some northern lights and reindeer and maybe find the North Pole and Santa Claus. Who knows when we're up there? But we're heading into the cold part of the world. Leaving Florida to go to Norway in February. Not too many people willing to do that, but we are. So.
You know, I opened up my Instagram the other day and I saw a friend of mine who's from Wisconsin. He's probably about 10, 12 years younger than me. And he was up in Tromsø. Is that where you were going?
Tromsø, yeah. And
he literally, in his little skimpy bathing suit, jumped into the Arctic waters. And I commented, I said, you're insane. And he said, I'm a Wisconsinite. It's in my blood. So
well, they have a little ceremony that you can do that when you cross the Arctic Circle and go up, that you have to go in an ice bath. So I'm going to
I expect you and Kathleen to be sending me similar videos. But we won't. I think when we go to Norway, we're going to go as far north, which is still pretty far north. But I don't think as far north as you are, and that's going to be the Lofoten Islands up there. And but we'll also. I was in Norway earlier this year, or I guess 2024, because we're in 2025 now. But I was in Oslo and Bergen, and that was cool. But now we're going to venture to some new territory. But I look forward to your reports, and I know I love seeing you travel around as well quite a bit. But Ed, you are the President-Emeritus of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida, which you're based in Tallahassee. Tell us a little bit about that organization. I know you were with them for a while.
Yeah, 19 years or so I worked for them. It's 31 not-for-profit private institutions all around Florida. So most of the private colleges that people know, or basically all of the private not-for-profits, are part of our association. It's called ICUF, Independent Colleges and Universities. Down in the Miami area, down there we have University of Miami, Biscayne, what used to be Biscayne, St. Thomas, uh, Florida Memorial, Nova Southeastern, all in that southeastern part of our state. Berry University is one of our members, and then as you move north, pretty much all of them: Florida Tech, Rollins, Stetson, Kaiser. And Kaiser's got a footprint pretty much all over the state.
We had Art Kaiser on this podcast about a year or so ago. So
Really,
yeah, I got to sit down with
he's
him.
a very innovative higher ed guy, extremely innovative, and has done some amazing things. Acquired, basically in Broward, acquired a university. I think it used to be called Northwood, but he bought that property, converted it to Kaiser, where it's a regular residential kind of typical college. He's very innovative, very creative. And all of those schools are. They do things differently than public institutions. But Donna Shalala, when she was president at the University of Miami, used to say that we were private institutions in the public service. And I always thought that was really a good, because when you look at the demographics of who goes, most people think, oh, it's too expensive. I can't go to a private college. Could be further from the truth. The demographics show lower income, middle income, higher income, probably the same or better than the public institutions over time. So it was a joy working there. We did a lot for Florida. My focus was always how can we help the state, and I think we did a lot with our institutions to move Florida forward.
So, Ed, you've worked in and around the public policy process for a while. One of the ways we connected was when I was working at the James Madison Institute, and I began working there in 2008. I met you as you were in this position with ICUF. I guess I'll just acronym it that way. And you, then I learned also that you had been a previous president of the James Madison Institute, I think in the late 90s, around 2000, somewhere around there. So we had that connection. I would see you at a lot of meetings around town in Tallahassee. And then you and I also served on the board of a charity music festival that I talk about a lot, Rock by the Sea. And we sometimes both get back to those. And it was a lot of fun being part of that board and getting to interact with musicians and have a good time and raise money for good charities, especially mostly like a lot of kids with cancer, things like that. So so I've gotten to know you a lot, but you're a little ahead of me here, and I want to go back to the past of Ed Moore, because you grew up in
South Florida. I mean, I grew up in when it used to be Dade County. Before it became Miami-Dade. And I grew up, first moved there, I was about 4.5 or so. Started kindergarten at what used to be Central Beach Elementary on Miami Beach. South Beach in those days isn't the South Beach that everybody thinks they know now. It was a very working class area. And then when I was in, third grade, we moved over to what became Little Havana, but I'm old enough I lived there before it was Little Havana. So it was just part of Miami, and right off of 8th Street, now Calle Ocho, but in those days it was just 8th Street, and as you went west became Tamiami Trail. And it was very different. Wasn't that big. Florida wasn't that big. Dade County back in those days was really a southern town. And the people that lived there were old Florida type people, and I watched it change. In 8th grade, I moved up to Broward County, lived in what then was a little small area called Miramar. Now Miramar goes forever west. We lived on the western end, and that was east of 27th Avenue, but we're just a few blocks east of that, and that was pretty much the western end of development when I was in high school. And now that spot, our house, probably be the midpoint of population from east to west. That's how big that area has grown. Miramar, Pembroke Pines, and those communities now go up. Kind of push the Everglades back a little, really.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's a different world than I grew up in. I mean,
so
we used to
let me
ride
go.
our bikes all over Miami, go downtown. This is probably off what you want to talk about, but we'd take our bikes across the bridge where the DuPont Plaza Hotel was there, go downtown to the Olympia and the Paramount theaters, which were really ornate buildings inside. They're very fancy for that time. And we just park our bikes outside the building, go in on Saturday and watch Saturday matinees and do all that. Come back, didn't lock your bike. You just came out. It was leaning up against the side of the building and go home. I don't think you do that today, but in those days you could do that.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't have a bike when you came out if you didn't do
No,
that today.
it'd be a long walk home.
So interesting. You grew up in the area now known as Little Havana before it was Little Havana. So as people might know from history, Fidel Castro, the Cuban Revolution came into Havana in 1959. Batista, the president at the time, fled. So somewhere in that period, but the Cuban Revolution really started around 1953. If you go back to when Castro started fighting and had some
Yeah,
forces, so there were some people moving in the 50s, but most people came. My dad actually and his parents came in September of 1960.
yeah,
They came and they actually landed in the area pretty close to Little Havana, but they had some American friends. Who knows? Maybe it was your parents. They had some American friends that said, there's no jobs here in Miami. Go to New York. So they went to New York for about 10 years. And then they came back to Miami, and all of a sudden that area was now called Little Havana by the late 60s. So
yeah.
tell me, though, what was the transition like to see that as a kid in Little Havana?
Well, there were groups of us Anglos, I guess you want to call us Anglos, that lived in the area as it started to change. And this was in the late 50s, like 57, 58, 59. There were daily flights. I think it was probably National Airlines, doesn't exist anymore, but from Miami to Havana. I mean, it was flights going back and forth. So, and it wasn't really difficult. It didn't require a lot of passports and all that. So a lot of the revolutionaries in Cuba would come over, and then they started moving their families over, and then they'd go back to take on Batista. The Batista people all owned properties in the Gables area. So south of 8th Street, or Calle Ocho, was where the Batista people mostly lived. And the revolutionaries or the Castro people lived between where we lived, or between 8th Street and the Miami River. And, so uh, they didn't blend real well. I mean, you didn't have a lot of violence or anything in the area. It was almost like a place they could go to take a little time off from going back to the turmoil that was going on in Cuba. Uh, the old Godfather movie, when the New Year's Eve is when Castro came into Havana, and then after that it still stayed sort of the same. The early days of Kennedy in 1960, when Kennedy first came in, and then when Castro declared that he was no longer Catholic and he was communist, and that changed the whole nature of all that. And most of those folks left. There were a lot of families, your families, others that came in and filled in. And I went to school with a lot of Spanish speaking kids. Actually, my first, I grew up Catholic. And when I went to catechism, my first catechism was downtown at Jesu, it's a church at Old Miami. Uh,
Yes.
my classes were in Spanish because there were so many Spanish kids at that point in time. And my mom thought, well, that's probably not a real. She should have left me there because I would have improved my Spanish. But we went to St. Peter's and Paul, which is on 12th and north of the Gables, still Miami, but right there. And that's where I did my first communion. And probably half of our catechism class were young Cuban immigrant kids. The Miami now that's there now, or Dade County, is a real blend of Central America, South America, but in those days, it was predominantly Cuban. I mean, that's who was coming there and filling out. Changed the nature of the community. I think I always had the feeling it improved it, made it. Miami finally became a very cosmopolitan kind of city, and now it's really the gateway to the Americas. I mean, and I know you're real involved with the chamber and other things down there. It's cool to have a city in the United States that's a focal point for two whole continents, really. And there's tremendous advantages to the state of Florida out of that happening. So I think over time, there are a lot of people who complain about all those immigrants, and those immigrants are very different than what we're dealing with now. There were people that came for freedom. They wanted to work. Like you said, your family had to go to New York to get work. I didn't know anybody that wouldn't take any job they could get to stay. And that's a good,
Yeah.
that's a very positive thing.
Well, it's almost, so I was born in Miami in the late 70s,
Which
and
hospital?
Baptist, it was called Baptist Memorial then.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Yeah. And, my parents then moved to Sunrise, this new kind of city in West Broward
Yeah,
in 1981. And, but, it's interesting because it's hard for somebody who has grown up in the 80s and 90s in South Florida. It's hard to imagine Miami being a southern white town
it is.
rather than just I mean, it's such a blend, right? I mean, even if it was just the Cubans, but like you said, all of South America, Central America is represented. But in addition, and I run the economic club of Miami too, and I meet frequently people from Eastern Europe, Russia, that are part of our club. People from different parts of the UK. I mean, people coming from all over the world
Yeah.
to live and be based in Miami, and then in addition, all the people that just come here to do business in Miami. It's just a real huge global hub now.
I don't know what the number is now, but when I was way back, I'm getting so old, I've done too many things, but I did some things with the British government right after 9/11. I was doing some things with the British government. And at that point in time, there were about any given day during the year, about 500,000 British subjects living in Florida, tourists
Wow.
or business people or whatever. So those changes that occurred in the late 50s, early 60s really made Florida a different state. And, when I was born, Florida was the smallest southern state. Now, you think if you keep that in mind, the smallest southern state of population, and now we're the third largest state in the country. It was the people that came here, and not just Americans, but people that came from all over South America and Europe. Drives our economy, creates jobs. It's a positive thing. I was very happy to see when you got involved with the economic club down there, because those kind of things stimulate people understanding this is who we are now, and we're here to create prosperity for people. And if we're a magnet for people to come here legally, you want them to come legally, but it's changed the nature of our state for the better, I think.
Yeah, and Miami's just a lot of times the place where people come, and then they move to Orlando or Tampa or other
Sure.
places, and it's really great. So Ed, so you grew up in South Florida, and what was your own educational path forward after that, and then how did you get started in your career?
It's probably a different story than most. I went to high school in Hollywood, Florida, at MacArthur High School. I was a really good, exceptional student. I was president of the class a couple of years and that stuff. And then towards the end of my junior year, I sort of got a little radicalized because the world was in turmoil, the Vietnam War, all kinds of things going on. And I became not a great student, but I also realized I was going to go to then it was called a junior college. I wasn't going away to school because we came from very modest means. At that time, there weren't all kind of scholarships and stuff. So I ended up going to Broward Junior College, which allowed me time to grow as a person. Uh, I had been picked when the end of my junior year. I was picked to go to Boys State, which is a great program here in Florida. For some reason, they thought I was worthy of sending up there, and I had a great time in Tallahassee. It was the first time I'd ever been to Tallahassee. I spent a good part of my childhood in Gainesville because my family have a I had a large amount of family in Gainesville. Uh, my family came to Florida in the 1830s and settled in that region. So I really didn't want to go to school where I had a town full of relatives. That's why I didn't go to Gainesville. And I had come up to Tallahassee for Boys State, fell in love with the campus here in Tallahassee, thought it'd be a good place. So when I back 2+2 kind of program, when I finished at the community college or the junior college, I transferred up to FSU and graduated from there. While there, I dated a girl whose roommate was going to be editor of the student newspaper, and she knew I could write well, so she enticed me to come in and start writing stories and being a reporter. And then I became the editorial page editor and associate editor of it was a daily paper. I mean, it was really smaller, but a daily paper. I met all kinds of politicians doing that. This When the Nixon McGovern race was going on, and everybody was coming through town. Uh, and I said, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to work for the legislature and first worked for a member and then transferred to committee staff. I've always been more of a policy person than a political person. So I got on committee staff, and then Gerald Lewis was the state controller then. They call it comptroller, not CFO. He asked me to be a cabinet aide for him, and I went and did that for a while. And then I ended up moving back to Broward County because the state senator from down there, we used to have a mental health system in Florida that had mental health boards all over. And they needed a politically savvy policy kind of person to come down and be the executive director of the Broward Mental Health Board. I was the ripe old age of 25, but they trusted me, and I went down and did that. And then my mother had remarried, and he kept coming down and wanting me to meet him to go fishing. Turned out he had some serious health issues and had a utility consulting company up in Illinois, and he asked me to move up there to just help him for a little while, and I could come back to Florida. A year and a half after I got there, he died. And here I've got this company, and we made it grow. We ended up being in 26 states. And in 1998, a German company, a big German conglomerate, through Price Waterhouse, called me up and said they have somebody who wants to buy your consulting company, and they gave me an offer, and I said bye-bye. That wasn't enough. 3 months later, they came back with an offer that it was worthwhile. We sold and moved back to Tallahassee, where Kathleen, she had a lot of family here, and I always wanted to move back here. So in '99, right after which we met, I moved back here, and Stan Marshall, who founded James Madison Institute, knew me from way back when I was a student, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So people don't know Stan Marshall, who was the founder of JMI, James Madison Institute, where I worked, and I got to know him as well. But he was the president of Florida State University for a couple of years in the 70s.
Yeah, when I was a student.
That's cool. And those were during, I read his book. So his book about the tumultuous 60s or something.
It was a trip.
Those were the days there, huh? But yeah, he was put in that position. He went from being a professor, I think a physics professor.
He was in education and sciences. So he did, yeah.
And I guess the previous president just basically, he was like Batista. He just fled because the students, everything was chaotic on campus, and they looked at this guy Stan Marshall and said, "Hey, can you
do this?
Can you do this for a year?" And then he did pretty good, and he was there for a few more years. And later on, he was on the board of governors for the state of Florida for a long time. But started this policy organization, James Madison Institute. Which, back to your story, what was it? 99. He made you president.
2000, right as 2000, he asked me to come over and do that. And while I was there, Tom Feeney was going to be a speaker in 2000, so he asked me to run a policy program for all the new House members. There's 120 members in the Florida House. He had 64 freshmen. I mean, that's because of term limits. Almost everybody was new. I mean, so we ran 3 weeks of policy programs while the Bush-Gore stuff was all during that. I had no problem getting people to come to Tallahassee to speak to these groups because we were the center of the universe for a brief period of time, and that's when we were running the training programs. I mean, Ed Meese was Attorney General. He came to town. Bill Bennett, Secretary, but he came to town. Art Laffer, the economist. I mean, if I called somebody and said, "You want to come?" they were on the next plane. I mean, that's how cool that was. And we put together a very unique training program for members, so much so that Texas called Tom Feeney, and Tom Feeney and I went out to Texas to show them how to do this. So it was innovative. It was anybody dealing with term limits and new people, it enabled them to do that. So from then I ended up being policy director of the Florida House, staff director for policy. And while I was there, my predecessor at the independent colleges, former state senator, had a heart attack and died. And they came over, and my chairman at the time told his good friend who was the head of president of Nova Southeastern. You're looking for somebody? Go get that guy in that office over there. I mean, that's really how it happened. And they came to me and said, would you like to do this? And I ended up doing that till 2019, 2020, around there. And yeah, learned a lot. I offered to do as much as I could. And, I've had a good life. I'm still looking for things to do. Governor DeSantis has appointed me to the Commission on Ethics. There's a constitutional board that's the Government Efficiency Task Force. Governor DeSantis put me on that. Governor Scott appointed me to 2 or 3 different boards. So I've stayed engaged in a lot of things. And, I love my state. I love my country. So, even at this stage of life, there are ways I can help. I mean, if Governor DeSantis called or somebody from the Trump team called me up and said, hey, Ed, would you do this? Would you do that? I would do that. And I would add, while I was at JMI way back then, I always wanted to get my doctorate. I had gotten my master's and bachelor's degree back in the 70s. I thought, why don't I go back to school? I was 49, dealing with students and all professors and all that. They treated me a little differently because of my senior status or whatever. But I had to go through the grind, and I worked and got my Ph.D. during that same time frame. We had 3 kids still at home, 1 at college, so I was trying to do all of those things at the same time. I guess my words for your listeners is never turn something down. You can always find room. I mean, it's the old adage, if you want something done, find a busy person to do it, because they know how to manage their time. I mean, look at you, all the things you do. You can get it done. There's ways to do that.
I noticed when the first time I joined a board, then within a year somebody asked me to join another board. Okay, I could
Yes.
do that. And then another, and then at one point I was like, no more board, like no. But I think I was like, what? I was like, get somebody else who's not on another board to join your board. But I think to your point, it's like people say, well, yeah, I mean they do that pretty well over there, and they seem to manage their time well. Let's get them on our team over here too. So, but yeah, you got to be a little careful with that.
Oh yeah. Well, and don't say no. I mean, I've always used a story when I've spoken to groups. And by the way, if there are groups out there that want a good speaker, I'm always happy to talk. I get more out of speaking, as you well know. You get so much feedback and you learn so much. But I surfed as a kid, and I've always had the attitude about life is like being a surfer. You can wax your board up and get all ready and go down the beach, and some days it's flat as it can be. Some days there's a little bit, and you optimistically paddle out and you wait for that good wave to come and ride that good wave. And I always tell kids, particularly students, keep your mind open for opportunity. The good wave's an opportunity, and ride it. You didn't plan for that ride. And my whole career, as we just kind of gone over it quickly, uh, my mother used to wonder if I could stay and hold a job for a long period of time, because she was from the old school of, you do this, and then where I was moving and doing, but I was surfing. It was, if an opportunity came along and it was something I thought would be challenging to do, I would take it on. And people have to have that open-mindedness, because the world is filled with opportunities. Florida's filled with opportunities. Grab them and do it. So you find a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to your point too, I mean, when you do say yes to things, maybe it's serving on a board or some kind of voluntary role in some other way. You meet a lot of people, you make a lot of connections, and
Oh, absolutely.
you learn a ton
Yeah, well,
about things that you had no idea that you would ever even know about.
Well, you're an expert at networking. I mean, and that's really all that it is. You look at all when you do these trips and pull people together. Look at all the people from disparate lifestyles and places and whatever that you're bringing together, and they work well together, and you have a great time.
Yeah,
And business is no different than politics. It's all the same. It's it's not who you know or whatever it is. To me, it's always a lot of what you know, but it's how you use what you know to deal with the people that you meet. So,
well, those are some wise words. So, Ed, you have we've heard your story now of all the involvement you've had in your career in different aspects of the public policy process. We're now in 2025. There's it's an interesting time. I mean, technologically, and it's an interesting time,
incredible.
right? I mean, whether it's these what we're doing right now, on a podcast far away from each other, two parts of the state, and being able to do this and record this, in real time, but also, artificial intelligence. I mean, we've got Tesla cars driving themselves. We got all sorts of stuff. We got 90 something rockets went into space just from Kennedy Space Center this year, just from SpaceX. So
I heard a
maybe more.
number. I heard a number the other day. They projecting 175, I think, in 2025 from the
Yeah,
Cape. I mean, that's amazing. You're gonna have
yeah. It's
traffic jams up there.
Yeah, it's so there's so much going on, and now we've got this new reality as well, where Donald Trump has been elected and is returning to office. Also, interesting historical point, because it's only the second time in U.S. history that a president got one term, then got a break, and then got
Yeah,
a second term. So that's going to be interesting what he and his team have learned to go into the second term. But you also have this, like, the world's richest person, Elon Musk, all of a sudden becoming buddies with Trump in the last 6 months, and also advising, and him and Vivek Ramaswamy are part of this team called Doge,
yes.
right? And so they are the Department of Government Efficiency. That's not really a department. It's not even part of the government, but it's going to advise the government on how they can be more efficient. We have a president talking about potentially eliminating different departments in the federal government. I don't know if that will actually happen, but draining the swamp might get some real elements going on, and also just some really bold cabinet picks and other nominations. So there's some people who may be listening to this that might be a little nervous about all of this, because it's a real shakeup to the system. Some people may or may not like the president elect. Well, yeah, he's the president elect as we're recording this, but probably by the time this comes out, he may be the president. And so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world too, right? Russia and Ukraine have been fighting for 3 years. We've got a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. We got threats from China and Iran, and there's
Yeah.
drones out there, and like Latin America is its own thing too, right? So we got a lot of things going on. We got immigration, So Ed, what do you think's going to go? What is your projection here for 2025? But also, um, given that all the things you've seen in your career, and how are you looking at everything going on here?
I'm extremely optimistic. I think very positive. Back in '16, when he got elected, I was not. I was not. I'm not a MAGA. I'm a government focused guy. How are you going to improve things? How are you going to find efficiencies? Those kind of things are very intriguing to me, and that's where I think we are now. They have Doge and all that going on, but I think also that's going to add to that is the people he's picking to be cabinet officers. Uh, I think their charge is going to be find efficiencies yourself within your new department. Stay in your lane, figure out what you can do here. How can we be more efficient in every department across government? And we all know that can be done. And that will bring about huge change. They got to get a lot done in a short period of time. Uh, People forget, they think it was a landslide. It was really narrow margins all across. You've got to impress them with the ability to get things done. I really am positive that that's going to happen. The House is razor thin margins, so you're going to have to do a lot of good things between now and the next election, which comes right around the corner, so that you get more Republicans on your team, grow that team. He's picking good people. I've met several of them. I've met Pete Hegseth, and I know Pam Bondi well. I know Marco Rubio. When I worked in the Florida House in our little suite of offices, Marco was in the office next to me. So I would be in there late at night working, and you know who else in the suite was in there working? Marco. He's always been that kind of guy. And I'm not surprised he's going to be a Secretary of State. To your point about world affairs, I'm extremely comfortable with Marco Rubio having a point man on those kind of issues as Secretary of State. We need to focus more on South America and Central America for our own economy and economic well-being. We've always had Asia, Europe kind of a focus. There's two really big continents that have been relatively ignored by us, South America and Africa. A lot of resources there, a lot of ability to plant and grow democratic societies. I mean, we can do that without having to use armed forces to do it. Uh, just good things all the way around. I've been very interested in education for a lot of years. When I lived in Illinois, I was on the Illinois Board of Higher Education, which is like the Florida Board of Regents or Board of Governors. Only I was also on a board that was called the K-20 board that had from kindergarten through graduate school on one board. And in Florida, I've served on, I forget all the boards I've served on that are education related boards. We can do more in education, and I think this administration might start putting focus on that. And when we look at NAEP scores, I don't want to get too far in the weeds for people, but the National Assessment of Education Progress, it's tests that people in every state take. And then when you compare that to other countries' exams, we're doing horribly bad. We're not producing the people we need. We need a reformed immigration system to bring in people that have the talents we need, because we're not producing them here. We need to figure out how to better produce them here. I mean, that's critical to moving our economy forward. So, but in the broader sense, I think this is going to be a fun 4 years. If you enjoy politics, it's going to get more fun by the day, because the Democrats aren't going to just lay there asleep. I mean, they're going to be opposing lots of things. Sometimes I'm surprised what they oppose. I mean, they voted, a number of them voted on the Lake and Riley Act that just passed, and the efforts to deport criminal aliens. 185 Democrats voted against doing that. I get lost on their logic and reasoning. Somebody once told me, "Don't look for logic where it does not exist." But
Well, sometimes I think politics, things have become so divisive that things that should just be common sense that like 99% of people should be on board of, it's just like, oh, they're there, they're on that side. Okay, then I'm on that side, right? It's
yeah,
like it just seems kind of stupid, and I think both sides kind of do that
well,
at
that's where
different
the
times.
policy guy in me comes out. That you need to have good, solid policy, and then let the politicians sell that policy. But you've got to build good policy. I mean, there's been discussion in Washington, for example, of doing away with the Department of Education. Well, you can do that, but you're not going to get rid of all of those programs that are now in the Department of Education. And you're going to have it's going to be housed somewhere else, but you're still going to have, funds going to K-12 education. You're going to have Pell Grants. You're going to have student loans. They're not going to do away with all those things, but there's efficiencies that can be found in all of those things. And so if you can reduce money, I mean, take Pell Grant, if you can reduce the money you're spending or better spend the money you're spending, having accountability, tracking kids better than we do now. Uh, some students, Pell, for example, Pell used to be 18 semesters. 18. A student
Wow.
could get a full Pell for 8. Well, what are you incentivizing there? To finish school and go out and get a real job, or enjoy your life? And we're going to give you $7,000 to $10,000 a year. They dropped that down to 12, but that's still 50% higher than the 8, you know, semesters that you should use to graduate from college. So there's savings you can find in all of those. Biden has tried, the courts have stopped him in almost every case, to forgive student loans. Well, if you're going to forgive any student loans, tie that into your economic development programs. What is Florida lacking? What do we need the most? And then try to entice students to go to become a nurse, a doctor, an IT professional, a teacher, whatever it is that we know we don't have enough of. Figure out a way to use the resources of government to create those. We haven't been doing that. I mean, you
So
you can major in anything you wanted, and you can still draw down the money. I don't like that idea.
yeah, so when you go back to what you've experienced over your career in Florida, uh, I don't know if you might agree with the fact that Florida government may have we might have had a lot more efficiencies
Yeah.
employed here over the number of decades. I mean, we are one of the most fiscally sound states that there is.
Yes.
We benefit from a lot of great things, like maybe a lot of people here getting Social Security checks, a lot of veterans getting checks
Sure.
from the federal government, right? There's a lot of ways that we kind of get indirect federal aid through individuals through their benefits, but also we don't have a state I'm sorry, we don't have a state income tax,
Right.
and a lot of our sales taxes are shared with our 105 million tourists or whatever that come here every year. And so there's a lot of ways we make other people pay those taxes for us as well.
Probably about 25-30% of the revenue collected are from people that aren't from here.
Isn't that great? I remember when Jesse Panuccio was the director of economic opportunity, he would give
Great
some
guy.
talks, and we hosted him when I was at the James Madison Institute. And I remember him saying, you know what Florida's like? Florida's like, basically he goes, I forgot what he said. He said, like, it's as if the whole state of Oregon got on a big giant airplane, came here, paid, spent all their money here, rented cars, blah, blah, and then after a week they all got back on their plane, and the other state that they're from actually had to pay all of their all of their public services and everything like that, and we just got to collect their sales taxes.
Yeah. And
Um,
every week you get a new giant airplane coming in,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I think his analogy may have been a little more sharper than I just explained it, but anyway, so in terms of the efficiencies that you've seen,
144 million visitors last year.
144 million.
Yes. Yeah.
That's insane. It just keeps going up. I can't keep track.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, what about so going back to the efficiencies that Florida, what do you think the federal government and the people working in it can learn from Florida about ways to find, to find some more efficiencies so we could save some taxpayer money?
Well, first of all, figure out where you're spending the money. I think that's probably job number one in DC. It's so big and so immense and so much money. There's no accountability anymore. And looking to how you're spending the money, what you're sending into education or higher ed, or where's the money going? How is it being spent? What's your retention rates in your colleges and universities? What's your graduation rate? What are the majors that they're in? I mean, I said before, tying a lot of that to the economic needs of the state or the country, I think is for first thing that they ought to be doing. And you find that there's tremendous amounts of waste in all of that. Allowing people to default on their student loans and just sort of disappear. You're talking about people defaulting $10,000, $100,000, $300,000. That is just not acceptable. I mean, they got to pursue those monies and get them back. And then just looking department to department, all the stories we're seeing right now are, what is it, 6% of the federal workforce is still working or is actually working in the office, and the rest of them are still working from home from COVID. Well, if they can do that, you and I both know those people aren't putting in a 40-hour week. A lot of efficiencies. Start getting rid of them. Stream down. It's impressive with Doge what you're seeing on social media that they were posting up. All the ideas that are flowing in. I mean, every day, hundreds of new ideas from a lot of them from people that are working in those programs. That are tired of the three offices next to them being slackers and not coming to work or not. I mean, you're going to see a lot of that and reduction of workforce, and then spending. There's certain things you should continue to spend, but spend more wisely. I'm sure the Pentagon wastes a lot of money, but it ought to be spending that money more wisely and more efficiently. The rest of the world's not waiting for us. They're moving ahead. They're developing new stories on some of the new weaponry that China's doing and stuff. We can't we're the bastion of the free world, and we will always be that way, at least for my lifetime. But we ought to be spending money wisely and engaging the private sector, sort of like you mentioned before with SpaceX and who's putting the rockets up there, who's controlling the satellites. Kennedy Space Center was kind of dwindling and not a lot going on for too many years. We haven't been on the moon since when, 1970 or so? I mean, we went there, got on it, did 2 or 3 of them right in a row, and then never went back. Well, that's crazy. And every time we do something like that, there's agents of innovation that are creating new products, new things that are applicable in the private sector. You're making better automobiles. You're setting up transit programs that are more efficient, self-driving cars. All of those things come from innovation that comes in large part sometimes from something like the space program. So we still miles to go before we sleep. I mean, that's always the way to be. But I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely excited about where our country's headed and the leaders we have from, in Washington, the people that are going into the cabinet, down to the state level, the people we have here like Governor DeSantis, innovative, pushes, always got his foot on the gas pedal and tap the brake every now and then when to fix something, and then back on the gas pedal. We'll move forward. That's how you have to be as a country. Washington is just wallowing in the mire for too long. It's an old Doors line from an old Doors song, but there's no time to wallow in the mire. Okay. And
So you mentioned Florida. So I mentioned good efficient government that we have, but also um, all of these people. You've mentioned some of the people you've gotten to know. I've met some of these people over the years as well, Pam Bondi and Marco Rubio, who are, Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State. Pam Bondi is likely going to be Attorney General. Um, we're sending a lot of other people like Susie Wiles is going to be the Chief of Staff
to Trump.
to the Trump, right? So you got all these Florida people. It's funny when there was a push for DeSantis to run for president. I think the DeSantis campaign or some people supporting him were using a phrase "Make America Florida" because everybody was moving to Florida and Florida was great and we were the most free state, especially during COVID. And now when you drive into the state of Florida, the welcome signs actually say
Free state of
"Welcome."
Florida.
Yeah, to the free state of Florida. So, but we're now, it seems like, okay, DeSantis didn't win, right? Trump is the president, and he's now by the way, a lot of people have missed this, Ed, but the first ever president elected from Florida.
Yes, U.S. I'd
Was
hope that'd be me growing up, but
yeah. No,
it's
of course it's
fantastic.
a New York. It's a New York transplant. That's just emblematic of the Florida story that we would have a New York transplant be the first Florida person from Florida becoming president. But anyway, it seems like it's really cool because a lot of the people that you and I have interacted with over the last 2 decades
A lot of
are
responsibility.
they're in the prominent roles in this administration, and they're going to be taking hopefully what they've learned here in the third largest state of the country and applying that in Washington D.C. to the federal government and work all over the world like Marco Rubio.
Oh yeah, Brian Hughes is going to be communication director and out of the White House or whatever title, I'm not sure, but he's going to be integrally involved. Susie Wiles is chief of staff. I mean, that's a huge role, an incredible role, non-elected, but you're 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 at the steering wheel, you're driving the bus, and she's solid. She's going to do a fantastic. Congressman Walz is going up for in intelligence. Uh, you know, I'm waiting for my phone to ring. I hope they call me and go, hey, see, maybe they'll see this and go, yeah, we need to put that guy to work. More people need to look to do those kind of things. Be willing to go to DC for a stint. Public service is good. I like seeing people run for legislature and come to Tallahassee and see what's going on. Uh, if you have an opportunity to do public service, do it. I've done it off and on. I started out in that, then private sector, and back in government, then not for profit, and I mean, you can do it all, and you learn so much and meet so many great people. I mean, Pam Bondi being an attorney general is just awesome. I remember when she got elected AG here in Florida. Marco Rubio, like I said, I shared office suite with him, drinking Cuban coffee at 9 o'clock at night, which is never a good idea, unless you want to stay up all night. Uh, People like that. I watched his family grow. I mean, I remember he'd come in with little kids when he was speaker, and now his son just scored a touchdown in the University of Florida bowl game. That was that little guy that I saw in the suite that, you know, just barely toddling around. Now he's playing college football. But they're from here. They bring Florida roots to Washington. They bring Florida ideas to Washington. and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's in some ways, I feel like it made the work that you and I have done in the Florida policy arena, like it makes it more like, wow, more rewarding, more worth it. That you know we've all been part of this system that we've been building. I guess you could say this grassroots to this just this network of people
Yeah,
that like. By the way, my first month at JMI was January of 2008, and JMI was hosting mostly modeled on the thing you started in 2000 with Tom Feeney as speaker. We were hosting a healthcare summit. You may have been there. I don't remember. But there was. We partnered with then Speaker of the House Marco Rubio
yeah,
because he wanted to have all, and he invited the entire legislature. It was almost all the Republicans came in, maybe like one or two Democrats, and to learn. And we brought in people from Heritage and Cato and AEI, and just to give ideas for healthcare policy
yeah,
because this was right before Obama was actually elected. And a lot of people were talking about healthcare. And so we later got Obamacare, right? But this was Marco trying to preempt whatever was coming next in the healthcare arena and trying to get some free market healthcare ideas in Florida. But it's funny, I met him about 2 weeks on the job at that event, and it was kind of cool. But just to see the shaping of Florida policy, the policy organizations like JMI, and then where you were at ICUF. I mean, we were all part of delivering these ideas to these people, and then this sort of network that had been developed with all of these legislators. Down here a few weeks ago, I ran into Adam Hasner, right? And Adam
oh yeah,
Hasner was, I think, under Marco, he was the House majority. I
majority
forget what
leader.
majority leader. It was either under Marco or right after Marco. I can't remember, but I remember him being there. And I saw him just a few weeks ago, and he's now one of the head people with the GEO group, but he's still very much involved with a lot of policy stuff and all these things that are going on. I said to him, I said, Adam, like you were part of this, like you made this happen. He was very humble and was like, no, I didn't, I wasn't a part of anything. But I do believe like those people, especially that 2008 2012 period when I was there. I mean, I just remember um Rick Scott getting elected, Pam Bondi coming in. I mean, just all these people now they grew over that last decade or so, and now they're ready to serve at the highest level in the free world. So it's pretty exciting that we were around all those kind of people and help maybe inform them a little bit.
Oh yeah, well, the foundation for all of that goes back to Jeb Bush as governor, his 8 years as governor. I mean, he planted the roots of conservative governance. And it's funny, later people saying, oh, Jeb was so liberal. I mean, it's like, what world are you from? Because then it was always one of the most conservative governors in the United States. And
Actually, I
but
saw some articles. I don't, I was like in high school, college when he was getting elected, but I saw some articles from that period calling Jeb Bush a right-wing radical.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
now people say he's too squishy, liberal, whatever. So it's kind of funny.
It's crazy, but he laid the foundation for all that. And then people like Rick Scott came in as governor, and then Ron DeSantis. I mean, we had one in between there that was a little bit squishy. I won't mention his name, but the others. And then the interesting thing to me is when you go back to that training program we ran in 2000, and the people. You can go to the book and look at all these people. Uh, Mike Herodopoulos, he's now in Congress. He was in that class. Uh, all kinds of speakers, Senate presidents, people that became CFO people were in that class. That 164 freshman group ended up all across Florida in leadership positions, and I egotistically think a little bit of some of that training and the things we discussed during that helped to. I didn't plant seeds, but I think I helped to fertilize them finding paths and becoming the leaders that our state needs. We need to do more of that kind of stuff because we get new freshmen every year and they do a little bit, but they don't do anything at all like Tom Feeney put in place. It really helps to grow leadership and creating leaders for our state in government is important. Leadership Florida does a good job of developing leaders in the business world and that kind of stuff. But making people get elected and understand there are pathways to becoming the next higher up job, the next higher up. Congress is replete with people that were in those classes back then from the Florida delegation. I mean, so, you know, as you said, getting to know these people and meet them and, you know, on a personal, I mean, if I'm walking through an airport, I'd be, hey, yeah, yeah. And it's people like that that just remember uh, what we've all done over the last 25 years here in this state. And I'm happy they're taking that to Washington. And
So
maybe,
speaking of this state, we talked about how Miami changed during the time you were living there, and Little Havana became Little Havana. I mentioned earlier, a lot of my experience with the Economic Hub of Miami, I've observed just Miami just becoming this economic hub, and like people are still coming in. People think it was like a COVID thing, 2020. I get people that are fresh, in the last couple months that are joining the Economic Club of Miami because they get here and now there's a network for them to fill into,
yeah,
and they're coming from New York or Chicago or somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Latin America. So it's really interesting. But then you trek up just a little bit closer to where I'm actually at in Palm Beach County, and you've got Mar-a-Lago is the center of the political universe. And every time, I mean, Javier Milei was there a few weeks ago. Elon Musk is always there now. Like who's who is there in the conservative world, but in the political world, Justin Trudeau, now the soon-to-be former governor of Canada. He was down there a few
51st
weeks ago.
state,
Yeah,
our 51st state.
he was down there a few weeks ago. I guess he was, trying to latch onto his political career. But we have it's so strange for just 25 minutes across town from where I'm sitting right now. The it's like the king of the castle over there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you trek up, like I said, up the coast to Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, and we're shooting off to Mars. And that we forgot we have this other thing in our state called Disney World and Universal, and they're still building new theme parks. There's going to be a new Universal Studios theme park soon. We have, I don't know,
It'd be better if they stay out of politics though, and
yeah.
focus on entertainment. So.
Yeah, maybe they're going to get back to that. But speaking of getting back to that kind of stuff, so anyway, we got this Florida at the center of the universe. But speaking of getting back to maybe saneness, Mark Zuckerberg just announced that Facebook is no longer going to have any censorship of any kind. I think that's taking a lead from Elon at what he's done with X. But I feel like when all these things are happening, it's like there's a paradigm shift happening. Maybe the culture's finding its way back to some kind of sanity, that's even broader than just what's going on in politics and government.
Well, if you look at the polling from this last election, the under 35 people, the under 35 voters, particularly males under 35 that voted, have really hugely shifted to the right. I mean, that's tremendous. Right now they're all baffled as to what made that happen. I mean, and we'll have all kinds of studies, I'm sure, to figure that out. But yes, there is a cultural shift going on. People, the sense of family is coming back stronger. People wanting to have a good job at decent wages, but a good community, a safe community. We're going to see a lot of focus on that, and that's part of this illegal alien stuff that's going on. If you don't feel safe in your community, everything else falters. And so we're going to see a lot of effort in that area. But I believe we have to spend a lot of time looking at education and what are we producing, how are we producing them, and what's the performance criteria. Having metrics to grade what's going on in our K-12 system. Florida's a leader in that, can bring a lot to that of the discussion. Back when Jeb was in, is when we first started really grading schools and doing all this kind of thing. But having performance evaluation, you don't have to do 5 tests a year to determine how well students are doing. Test them when they walk in the door at the beginning of 5th grade and do standard tests at the end of the year, and you'll see what kind of a knowledge growth occurred, and use those as tools to improve for that individual student, develop an IEP for that individual student. So when they come back in for 6th grade, you know what to focus on for that student. We've kind of backslid a lot on that as a country. Accountability is a good word, and we ought to be using more of it.
So yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Uh, there's a lot of people talking about shutting down different departments, especially the Department of Education. We're talking about the federal level. This doesn't mean education wouldn't continue. Doesn't mean public schools would close. This just means the bureaucracy at the DC level. Maybe we shut that down and we decentralize it back to the states, where maybe there's a Florida Department of Education that takes more responsibility, or the local
Yes.
county school board, takes more responsibility. What do you think? And I know Linda McMahon has been nominated to be the Secretary of Education. This is the wife of the wrestling mania guy, right?
Entrepreneur,
WWF.
innovator.
Yeah. And so, but what do you think about and especially for a lot of conservatives, it's kind of been almost like a 40-year, 50-year dream to try to shut down the Department of Education, which actually Jimmy Carter created, and then I think Ronald Reagan elevated to a cabinet level. So, what do you think about this call to shut down the Department of Education?
I think the optics on it are good. I think in the sense of if you want to show efficiency in government, but there are ways to do those things that are much more efficient. You don't need a lot of bureaucrats. Take Pell, for example. Pretty much every state has a distribution process for students for the state money that goes out. If a student chooses to go to Florida State University and he qualifies for Bright Futures, there's a mechanism for that. They have a bureaucracy within the state. Congress, what they can do, Congress can do with student loans and Pell and other title monies that flow to the states, do categoricals in the budget. When you fund it, do categoricals in the budget that break out. Florida gets 1.2 billion, Connecticut gets whatever, and then send it to the state and allow the state boards of education and their mechanisms to do the distribution. What you retain, wherever it's housed in Washington, whether it's at the Department of Commerce or whatever, even if you have a shrunken Department of Education, should be accountability focused, doing accountability audits, grading where's the money being spent by the states, how well is it being, and then put penalties in there. If states are not spending it wisely or spending it well, or there's fraud involved or whatever, well, then they suffer the consequences. But there are ways to do that that don't require a giant bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. So Linda McMahon is going to probably be charged with having to do something along those lines. Will have a deputy secretary and an undersecretary that would be doing a lot of the real grunt work on those kind of things. Every department in DC should have that kind of focus, though. How can we do something better? Can we send the money out to the states and just not manage, but oversee where they spend it, judge them over time, far more efficiently than the way we're doing it right now?
Well, it seems like we could get, I mean, that's the one thing lacking in Washington, D.C., accountability and efficiency. And we just got to get it under control. We'll have to see if Trump and his team can do it, and how long they have to do it, because the thing is not
clock's always running.
Yeah, and the next cycle is going to be starting very soon for people running for 2026 for Congress, and I'm sure for the next president as well in 28. But Ed, this has been a great conversation with you. You've definitely been an agent of innovation in Florida. The amount of change that you've been able to witness in Florida alone, just as an economy and the growth of the state, but also how the cities and communities have changed, the education systems change, the people in government have changed, all the different organizations you've been a part of. You definitely you're a well-known entity in the Florida public policy process, for sure, up and down the line.
And I'm honored to be in that. I mean, I love my state and I love the people engaged in it. So if I'm well thought of or nicely thought of, or nobody's throwing tomatoes at me, I'm happy.
That's good. Well, hey, look, I'm gonna just throw this out there. If anyone's watching or listening, Ed's technically retired, but he's not really. You heard all the things he's still involved with. He's on different boards. He's advising people, all sorts of things. Maybe he's got a year or two in him in Washington, D.C., and I don't know if the Trump and his team are listening here. but he definitely he's going to know how to get some things done up there. So I say recruit Ed to Washington D.C.
If
and
they call, I would take the call. Okay. So
yeah, okay, he'll take the call. All right, well, Ed, any last words before we sign off here for this episode?
no, I would just encourage people listening to take chances, grab chances when they come along, spend your time wisely, and stay positive. I mean, there's so many good things out here, and the stuff that I've been able to see through my life, the innovations and changes, and you got to try to stay a little bit ahead of the curve. And I try to read about a book a week. Different kinds of things. Some of it faith-based, some of it just boring. Stuff would look at it and go, "Oh, I wouldn't read that. That's boring." Some of it's motivational, and some of it's fiction. Reading it's an old cliche. Reading is fundamental. They used that years ago, but it is. It's having the knowledge to respond to change, I think, is critical for anybody. And if you're going to be an innovator, you really got to stay ahead of everybody else and drag the rest of us along.
Well, I think one of the common characteristics of the entrepreneur, the successful entrepreneur, I might add, is that they're lifelong learners, and we have one right here in front of us, Ed Moore, reading at least a book a week, among other things, keeping up with podcasts and newsletters and everything else. So we appreciate all that you've done to help make Florida the free state of Florida, and to continue to attract a lot of people here. So thanks, Ed, for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thanks for being an agent of innovation yourself.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for all the good things you do as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.